Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. This time, we're going to be tackling something that I know a lot of you guys out there are probably dealing with, and that's how to really thrive in your 20s. You know, it's one thing to just survive the craziness of your 20s, but it's another to actually, build a life you love. And we've all heard those pep talks, enjoy your youth, you have time. But I don't know about you, but for me, it always felt like something was missing from that advice. Like there was another level we should be getting.
Yeah, like there's this whole other toolbox that nobody's telling you about.
Exactly. So to help us navigate all of this, we're diving into this piece called The Importance of Emotional and Mental Skills in Your 20s. Unlearning, being, and doing. And get this, it actually throws out that whole idea that your 20s are supposed to be miserable.
Yeah, it's like, why are we just accepting this? Like, why is that the narrative?
Right.
It's not a given.
Yeah.
Like, it's interesting because the source uses this really powerful story about a parent dealing with ALS. And it really highlights how we shouldn't waste time on, unnecessary misery. None of us know how much time we have, so why just accept, confusion and anxiety as, the default setting for this decade of our lives?
Yeah, that really hits home. I remember when I first moved to a new city in my early 20s, and talk about anxiety, I had no clue what I was doing career-wise, and my dating life was, well, let's just say it was a learning experience. I wish I'd had some kind of roadmap back then.
And that's exactly the point the source is making. We're told to figure things out. But we often lack the skills to actually do that. We're making these huge decisions about our careers, who to be with money, all this stuff. And our brains are still developing.
It's true. I felt like I was constantly making choices based on what other people thought I should be doing, not what actually felt right for me. And the source brings up this interesting thing about neuroscience and how our brains are super adaptable in our 20s. So the habits we form now have this massive impact later on.
It's kind of like imagine walking through a field. And the more you walk down the same path, the more worn down that path gets. It eventually becomes like the easiest route to take.
Yeah.
Even if it leads you somewhere you don't want to go. Our brains kind of work like that.
Whoa, that's a really vivid way to put it. So how do we ditch those unhelpful paths and create new ones that actually lead to a life we want?
Well, this piece introduces this framework of 3 pillars: unlearning, being, and doing. And it's not just fluffy self-help stuff. It's about practical steps you can take.
Okay, I like practical. So let's unpack these pillars. First up, unlearning. What exactly are we supposed to be unlearning here?
So think of it as letting go of all those beliefs and expectations we've picked up that don't actually serve us. The things that are holding us back from living authentically. Like maybe you were told growing up that success equals a fancy job title and a big paycheck. But what if that's not what you truly value?
Oh man, that hits home. I was raised with this very specific blueprint of what my life should look like, stable job, get married, the whole 9 yards. And it took me a while to realize that blueprint wasn't actually built for me.
Yeah, and that's a classic example of something you can unlearn. The source actually tells this story about a parent who chased financial success their whole life, but never found peace because it wasn't aligned with their true values. They built the house everyone expected, but it wasn't a home.
So unlearning those ingrained beliefs is the first step to building something more authentic and fulfilling.
Exactly. It's about getting clear on what you value, not just what society tells you to value. And this is where things start to get really interesting. Because once you start unlearning, you create space for the second pillar, being.
Okay, so being sounds a lot more internal, right? Like getting to know ourselves better.
Precisely. It's about cultivating self-awareness and emotional health. Understanding your thoughts, feelings, and motivations, all those things that drive your choices. And they're very practical tools to help you do this.
You mean things like therapy, journaling, mindfulness, that sort of stuff? I've tried journaling on and off, but I'll admit, sometimes I feel like it's just me complaining on paper.
Well, think of it like this. If your house had a leaky roof, wouldn't you want to figure out why it was leaking before just slapping a patch on it? Journaling can help you understand the source of those leaks in your emotional world. Why are you feeling stressed or frustrated? What's causing those negative thoughts?
That's a good point. It's not just about venting. It's about getting to the root of things. But how does all this being stuff actually help us build a better house, so to speak?
Think of it as home improvement for your mind. As you develop self-awareness, you become better at recognizing those leaky roofs, those patterns of thought or behavior that aren't serving you. And from there, you can start to make changes.
So it's like we're not just patching up the cracks anymore. We're actually renovating and reinforcing the whole foundation of our house. That's a pretty powerful image.
Exactly. And this is where things start to move from the internal to the external. Because once you've done some unlearning and being, you're ready for the third pillar, doing.
Okay, bring on the action. I'm guessing this is where we put all that self-discovery into practice.
Got it. Doing is about taking bold action that aligns with your values,
No.
even when it feels scary. The source makes this interesting comparison to skydiving. Often the fear is way worse than the actual jump.
I can definitely relate to that. I remember quitting my first job after college, and it was terrifying at the time because it felt like I was throwing away everything I'd worked for. But it turned out to be the best decision I ever made. It led me to a career path I actually loved, and it taught me that taking risks can pay off.
And that's a perfect example of what doing is all about. It's about making those big, sometimes scary decisions that move you closer to the life you want.
Oh?
It might be quitting a job that's draining you, ending a relationship that no longer serves you, or finally starting that creative project you've been dreaming about. It's about trusting your gut and taking those leaps of faith, even if they go against what others expect of you.
Yeah, it's like when I finally decided to go back to school for a completely different career, everybody thought I was crazy, but I was miserable in my old job, even though it looked good on paper. So taking that leap was terrifying, but it changed everything.
And I think that's the key takeaway here. The source is arguing that your 20s aren't just about figuring things out,
Hmm.
but they're about actively building those emotional and mental skills that are going to serve you for life.
Yeah, it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving,
Exactly. It's like emotional intelligence decision making. These aren't just soft skills that you can put off learning.
right? Like, imagine trying to learn a new language in your 40s versus your 20s. It's not impossible, but it's definitely a lot easier when you're younger. Same goes for all this stuff. I wish somebody had taught me some of these skills earlier. I think it would have saved me a lot of stress and bad decisions.
Totally. And think about how many people hit their 40s and 50s and have a total meltdown
Yeah.
because they built a life that they don't even want. It happens all the time.
Yeah, right. It's like they finally wake up and realize that house they built is totally wrong for them. But at that point, it's like a way bigger renovation project.
Oh, exactly. Wouldn't it be amazing to avoid all that by laying a solid foundation in your 20s? That's
Yeah.
the whole point of this framework. It's about taking ownership of your happiness now.
Okay, so we've got these three pillars: unlearning, being, and doing. How do they all fit together?
It's a cycle, really. The more you unlearn those limiting beliefs, the more you understand who you are and what you actually want. And that self-awareness gives you the confidence to take those bolder actions that align with your values.
So unlearning makes room for being, which then fuels doing. And the more you do, the more you learn about yourself, which leads to more unlearning and kind of refining who you are. It's like this constant evolution.
Precisely. And the cool thing is those skills compound over time. It's like investing early in a retirement account.
Hmm.
The earlier you start, the more those initial contributions grow.
So by embracing this whole growth mindset early on, we're basically setting ourselves up for a more fulfilling life down the road. We're making those well-worn paths in our brains lead us toward something we actually want. But let's be real for a sec, putting all of this into practice can feel kind of overwhelming.
Absolutely. And that's why the source emphasizes taking small steps. It's not about making massive changes overnight. Start with one thing. Maybe it's journaling for 5 minutes a day or finally scheduling that therapy appointment you've been putting off.
Or even just identifying like one limiting belief that you want to start questioning. Like, what if instead of, I need to have my entire life figured out by 30, you shifted it to, I'm curious to see where my path leads, and I trust myself to make adjustments along the way.
Exactly. It's about reframing those thoughts. And remember, it's a process. You're not going to nail this overnight. It's about progress, not perfection.
This is making me think about those leaky roofs in my own life. Like,
Yeah.
where do I need to do some renovations, and what beliefs am I holding on to that are actually holding me back?
Those are great questions to be asking yourself. And that's what this whole deep dive is about, giving you the tools and encouragement to start building a life that truly reflects who you are.
So for anyone listening, we're throwing down a challenge. What's one small step you can take this week to apply any of these pillars to your own life?
Write it down. Put it in your calendar. Tell a friend to hold you accountable, whatever works for you. Even the tiniest action can create a ripple effect.
I think a lot of people get hung up on the doing part because it feels so big and scary. But if we focus on the unlearning and being first, the doing becomes less daunting.
Absolutely, you're building that foundation. And from there, taking those leaps of faith becomes a little less terrifying.
Well, on that note, I think we've covered a lot of ground. It's been really eye-opening to move beyond that whole miserable 20s narrative and see this decade as a time for serious growth.
Me too. It's empowering to realize that we have the tools to shape our own paths, even if those paths are a little messy and unpredictable sometimes.
So before we wrap up, let's do a quick recap of those three pillars and their key takeaways, just to make sure it all sinks in.
Sounds good. So first up, we had unlearning, challenging those ingrained beliefs and societal expectations that might be holding you back. It's about questioning everything and defining success on your own terms.
Next, we talked about being, cultivating self-awareness and emotional health. This is where things like therapy, journaling, and mindfulness come in. They're not just trendy buzzwords, they're legit tools for understanding yourself better.
And lastly, we explored doing, taking bold, aligned action. Those sometimes scary decisions that move you closer to the life you envision. It's about trusting your gut and taking leaps of faith, even if they go against the grain.
And remember, it's an ongoing process. Yeah, it's like we're not just building a better life for ourselves, but we're actually contributing to a better world just by doing this inner work.
Right. And that's what makes this journey so exciting. It's not just about personal gain. It's about creating positive change that ripples outward.
So for anyone listening who's feeling a little lost or overwhelmed in their 20s, remember this. You're not alone.
You have the power to shape your own path. Embrace the unlearning, the being, the doing. It might be messy and challenging at times, but it's so worth it.
And don't be afraid to seek out support along the way.
Find mentors, connect with people who inspire you, build a community that lifts you up.
We're all in this together, figuring it out as we go. And the more we embrace this journey of growth, the brighter the future becomes, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us.
So as you navigate the ups and downs of your 20s, remember that you have everything you need to create a life that's truly fulfilling and aligned with your heart.
We're so glad you joined us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep striving to become the best version of yourself.
We'll be here cheering you on every step of the way.